The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Now a man was ill, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who had anointed the Lord with perfumed oil and dried his feet with her hair. It was her brother Lazarus who was ill. So the sisters sent word to him, saying, "Master, the one you love is ill." When Jesus heard this, he said, "This illness is not to end in death, but is for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was ill, he remained for 2 days in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just trying to stone you, and you want to go back there?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in a day? If one walks during the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if when one walks at night, he stumbles because the light is not in him." He said this, and then he told them, "Our friend Lazarus is asleep, but I am going to awaken him." So the disciples said to him, "Master, if he is asleep, he will be saved." But Jesus was talking about his death, while they thought that he meant ordinary sleep. So then Jesus said to them clearly, "Lazarus has died. And I am glad for you that I was not there, that you may believe. Let us go to him." So Thomas, called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go to die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, only about 2 miles away. Many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary sat at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise." Martha said to him, "I know he will rise in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who was coming into the world." When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary secretly, saying, "The teacher is here and is asking for you." As soon as she heard this, she rose quickly and went to him. For Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still where Martha had met him. So when the Jews who were with her in the house comforting her saw Mary get up quickly and go out, they followed her, presuming that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her weeping, he became perturbed and deeply troubled and said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Sir, come and see." And Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not the one who opened the eyes of the blind man, have done something so that this man would not have died?" So Jesus, perturbed again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay across it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the dead man's sister, said to him, "Lord, by now there will be a stench. He has been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd here I have said this, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said this, he cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, tied hand and foot with burial bands, and his face was wrapped in a cloth. So Jesus said to them, "Untie him and let him go." Now many of the Jews who had come to Mary and seen what he had done began to believe in him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Even though they're very long, I love the Gospels for the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Sundays of Lent. But actually, if you think they're long, just wait for the Easter Vigil. There's nothing. 2 weeks ago, the woman at the well, Jesus tells this woman that he is living water and that only he can quench her thirst. The church gives us this gospel during our Lenten journey that we might more fully know that he is really the only one who can quench our thirst and will give us whatever it is that he knows we need. Last Sunday, the church gave us the gospel of the man born blind. The church invites us to go beyond physical blindness to see whatever it is that blinds us to the goodness of God, the goodness of others, the goodness in ourselves. The church hopes that we can more readily see this goodness of God everywhere. I love the phrase from the psalm, "Our darkness is never darkness in your sight." God always sees good. God always sees beyond what we can see. And today, this great reading of the raising of Lazarus, even though the story is about a dead man being raised from the dead, what the church really wants to communicate to us in this gospel towards the end of Lent is that our life is a constant series of inner risings, inner resurrections. What does this mean, that our lives are a constant series of dying and rising, death and resurrection? We know that we are constantly moving from death to life, from taking up to letting go, from possessing to surrendering, from dying to being born. This is the movement of life. Take wine, for example. Wine is the result of a process of growth and destruction. A new vine comes forth from the earth. The grapes are picked and then they're crushed to produce new wine. They ferment for some time. During each stage of the process, from the planting of the vine till it becomes wine, something gives way to become something else. Destruction and growth, dying and rising. It's the way life is. Life presents to us countless moments of death which open a way to new life. Breaking a vice or a sinful habit, leaving behind an addiction, asking for forgiveness when love has been broken among family or friends, being patient in the face of an illness or an injury, facing a dark moment in a very painful conflict, remaining faithful by the side of a sick or an elderly person who needs us, sacrificing our own pleasures or desires to help others who need something, dying to all that was in one place to find life in another place. These are all moments of death that open the way to new life. These are all inner risings, inner resurrections of divine life within us. Now, the only way we can really believe that, or come to see that all of our dyings give way to risings, that all of our deaths give way to inner resurrection, is if we awaken to friendship with God. God is really our closest companion, but because most of us were raised with infantile, scary notions of God, kind of like a divine boogeyman built around fear, we find it really hard to believe that God is our closest companion. And the truth is that God could not be closer to you than he already is. We awaken to a deeper friendship with God that we might know his inner working in us through prayer. Of course, you would expect me to say that, but I want to say that the monks have always taught that silence, real silence, has to be part of the life of anyone who desires to follow Jesus. In fact, every world religion worth its weight has silence as part of the way it understands its prayer. Silence allows us to simply rest in God's presence. In our day, maybe for the past 40 years, we've kind of called this centering prayer. And over the long haul of doing centering prayer, we do come to rest in a silence, to rest in the arms of a God whom we can trust and whom we can believe is constantly bringing life out of death, rising out of dying in our lives. This God who is our closest companion. Now, I don't want to make fun of how people pray, but we often just pray talking to God, telling him what we need, which simply might be reinforcing what we don't need. So here's the bottom line of most people's prayers. It goes like this. Oh God, do for me now what I would do for you if you were me and if I were you. But it doesn't work that way. You're not God. Well, I'm not God. But notice in today's gospel, the sisters of Lazarus don't really ask Jesus for anything. They did not say, oh Lord, please cure our brother. They simply stated the problem. The one whom you love is ill. They laid their concern in front of Jesus and let him decide what to do. They had graduated from the tendency to advise God on what God should be doing because they wanted it. I always say most people want to serve God as an advisor. He doesn't need any advisors. That's why he's God. We find it difficult to pray this way. So much of our prayer only reinforces what we think that we need. People often will say to me, God doesn't answer my prayers. And my response is, why should he? He knows what you need. You don't. He is always answering the deepest prayer that every one of us has. And the deepest prayer that every one of us has is to be transformed into Christ. That's the deepest prayer, whether we word it or not, whether we're even aware of it or not. The deepest prayer that God puts inside of us is to be transformed into Christ. That's the prayer he's always answering. So you might say, oh, he didn't answer that prayer. Well, obviously he did, but in a different way. We are transformed in this silence. It's kind of like turning your radio from AM to FM. You're on a different frequency. After periods of silence every day for your life, it's simply a different way of understanding what God is doing and believing in God's constantly bringing life out of death. So our life is an unending series of dying and rising, death and resurrection, but always to more and more divine life. This is, of course, what we call the Paschal Mystery, the Easter Triduum at work in us, that God is always bringing life out of death, rising out of dying. This is what transforms us into Christ, which is, of course, our ultimate and only real desire.